want to welcome everybody to the Nebraska Museums Association monthly musings. Today we've got Liz Boutin talking about risk management. So I'll let you take it away.
Woohoo! Uh, Thank you, Karen. It's nice to see familiar faces again after leaving Nebraska Museum Association due to moving northwest. So I'm currently in a different time zone. It's like 8:30 in the morning here, which is nice. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm just going to go over about risk assessment in museums and what you can do to help prevent any issues or hazards that may come into your institution. The risk assessment is basically like a worksheet. So I'll show some examples because not every institution is the same when it comes to doing these risk assessments. So I will show some examples of worksheets that basically you can Google as well on and pick and choose off these worksheets what would best suit for your building and your institution. So the risk assessment can go hand in hand with being part of the risk management and part of your emergency preparedness plan, as well as your integrated pest management program, which everyone should have. And when it comes to assessing a risk, you must analyze a threat's probability of occurrence and the severity of its consequences. So you'll need to identify the possible ways losses can occur, what the impact of those losses could be, and how to prevent or reduce those losses in the future. So what is risk assessment? Basically, just what I kind of said, it's an activity to calculate an objective view of the magnitude of the risk to the collection or item. It includes an analysis of the probability and the likely impact of an unwanted event or threat. Risk management is kind of a blend of the continuing of your risk assessment, because in your risk assessment, you're going to identify, assess, and prioritize these risks. And then once these are identified and the prioritize, then you're going to form a plan program, and that's where risk management comes in, so you can control the impact of these threats to your collection. So just a quick definition, can get confusing. Threat is a hazard or a cause of an unwanted event, and then the risk is the chance of likelihood of that threat or unwanted event occurring. So risk would be like, or hazard could be, your electric wires are exposed. A threat would be someone touching them and getting hurt. I found this meme and I thought it was appropriate. Some might relate, say, yeah, we saw that risk possibility. We chose to ignore it. That can happen more often than not. You can see something like, oh, yeah, just off the high, your roof, yeah, not looking good, but it's still standing. If you keep putting it off, that can be a hazard, and it can develop into a high cost for your institution. So who should be involved in conducting a risk assessment? Highly encouraged, yes, your board, or at least a member of your board should be involved when you go to conduct a risk assessment. Obviously, your executive director should be involved, or at least someone from administration. Staff and volunteers should be involved in the risk assessment. They're the ones that are there in your institution every day. That could also include the collections manager, registrar. Also would recommend if there's someone, if you have someone who works in facilities, that would be a good person to be also involved. First responders, it's good to have them involved. If not, definitely would be involved in the emergency preparedness plan, because they need to know where your collections are stored and the layout of your institution. So how do I conduct a risk assessment? Well, first, again, reiterate, you need to identify the potential threats or hazards that have the greatest probability of occurring and those with the most significant adverse impact on the museum collection. Then you look for irreplaceable, valuable, and particularly sensitive objects, especially those on exhibit. So you can't forget about any items that are on display or in an exhibition. Then finally, you analyze the nature and effectiveness of the protection currently given such objects. So for example, if you want to access how well an object is protected from theft, try to think like a thief. Now, I made this presentation, this PowerPoint, before the robbery of the Louvre. So for an example, to assess how well an object is protected, try to think like a thief. I was just like, oh my gosh. When I saw that incident happen, I was like, yeah, I guess I can include that in my PowerPoint. A couple pictures from that. So yeah. And when you're doing a risk assessment, we cannot forget the 10 agents of deterioration. These are very important to keep in mind as you're doing a risk assessment. Collections, as we all know, are intended to serve the public for decades or, way into the future. And so everyone, which includes the staff, volunteers, and even the board members, all have to act together to reduce the overall risk to the collection. Policies and procedures should also be in place, which will help out tremendously. And I'm going to go over a quick overview of the 10 agents of deterioration. This could be like a whole other topic for another museum musings in itself. So we have physical forces, you have thieves and vandals, dissociation, fire, water, pests, pollutants, light, ultralight, and infrared, incorrect temperatures, and incorrect relative humidity. So examples. So example of physical forces, improper support, objects that are damaged by handling, or a natural disaster. Nebraska is prone to tornadoes, high winds, flash flooding. So those can all need to be in factor when you're looking over and doing your risk assessment. Thieves and vandals, such as destruction of property. Dissociation. Examples are like misplacing objects or removing labels from objects, including incorrect labeling. An example, I volunteer for a museum over here, and just yesterday I found an object that had 2 object ID numbers on it, and it was on the same tag. One number was on one side, another number was on the other side. So got to be careful on that. Also with dissociation, some people tend to forget you cannot forget your data. How is your data stored on your computer for your institution? I know a lot of collection management programs have or systems such as Past Perfect 5 have a backup. So you want to do your backup daily. So you don't want to lose any information unless you have the web version. The web version does that automatically. But not only your collections, but also any other data that you have, files or folders, where are they stored? If they're stored on your computer, do you have copies of that data stored on such like an external hard drive? If not, that is something you should consider. So any files you can store on an external hard drive. Now that hard drive in return needs to be stored somewhere safe. So either off-site or in a fireproof safe. That way, if you have a fire, you do not lose your data. So a part of the risk assessment is also your data. Fire, of course, is one of the agents. Water, of course, is another one. Picture there shows actually must have happened during wintertime because you have ice hanging off of the chairs. Pests, such as insects, vermin, birds, and animals, including mold, is considered a pest. Pollutants, like air quality, can, example there, tarnished silver. And this was a good example of how light, ultraviolet light, or infrared light can affect an object on display. This photo is of a military uniform on the left. Same uniform on the right, but it's with the collar lifted and all the medals lifted, and you can see the damage that light has done because this has obviously been on display way too long. Incorrect temperatures can do some damage on artwork. This is an example of a painting with some cracks through the paint. Incorrect relative humidity can have an issue on your collections. This is mold being shown on a book. So here's an example of a risk assessment process. So the top three to keep in mind is identified hazards, potential risks, then you analyze and evaluate these risks, likelihood, and the impact on the museum. And then comes the mitigation and the planning of what you're going to do. And when you're conducting the risk assessment, you can categorize the levels of risk that happens to the building, the staff, and collections, such as a low risk, medium or moderate, and a high risk. So for example, list below is like if you have some lights out in a gallery, that we consider like a low risk. Medium is climate control malfunction. So it's a moderate, requiring attention and specific action plans that are in place. Now, high risk, of course, is more severe, and that's like your fire, your flooding, or electricity, object being damaged as such. And like I said, there are several worksheets, which I have examples to pull from. This is a great website, FAIC, and it has risk evaluation and planning program. These are nice tools to go through and download free to help in putting together a risk assessment worksheet. So like I said, every institution can be different. I mean, the same goal, the same mission, but storage could be different. Your overall building envelope can be different as well. So this is a good place to start here. I'm downloading, and some examples here is off of this site, evaluation planning. These are like little questionnaires that either you can print off or you can pull from the worksheet and create your own worksheet yourself. And so it's general questions, emergency plan procedures, you have them in place. Who's the person? Do you know? Funding, documentation, when was the last date of the last inventory? All kinds of different questions. This one is from ARCS, which you can download as well. And it goes and talks about more about risk assessment process. What I really liked is when you're looking at your collections, this diagram actually helps you think outside of the archival box, I should say. So if you have an object, you're not only looking at that object, but you're also looking, where is that object stored? Looking at the storage unit. And then the room, you're looking at the room as well as this object, where this object is stored. Then you're looking at the building, how's the building around protecting this object, and then the region around that building, aka weather as such. So some things to keep in mind. This is another resource you can use, Benchmarks and Collections Care for Museums, Archives, and Libraries. It is 92 pages, but it has some great use as far as a checklist as well that you can use. And I will show you an example of one that I created myself. But here's another example from the FAIC. And it's good that it categorizes it in different categories: emergency response, the grounds, or the building exterior, building interior, and then it gets into the collection. So these can actually be pretty lengthy worksheets. You can have several pages of questions on different topics. Insurance is an important one. Your staff responsibilities, institution policies is important. Best practices, So you can grab like building exterior, building interior is one good categories. And I'll show an example, kind of what I have as an example. So a sheet here, they have a risk assessment. And like I've talked about risk level before, either being low, moderate, or high. And then I just kind of categorize like building or grounds exterior. Because when I do a risk assessment on an institution, I usually start from the outside and work the outside in, going into the building and further into the storage and the object, etc. So some things I put on, I just grabbed a bunch of like questions that maybe some might not think about when you're putting together a worksheet for your risk assessment. So such as outside, are railings, benches, planters, and light poles well anchored? Yes or no, or may not pertain to you. Then I would write down like, what's the risk level? Is it low? Is it moderate? Is it high? And then you can add a few notes like, yes, date, such and such, noticed the railing is loose, contacted facilities, repairs to be done on such and such date, type deal. There are some worksheets that go a little more extravagant. If you look, Google risk assessment sheets, they categorize like 1 through 5, saying risk are like, well, likely, most likely, or less likely. And I get, for me, it gets a little confusing. Like if I find something, I'm like, well, is it less likely or just likely? It's like a, it's like a if, and so I just direct, it's either low, moderate, or high. Overhanging trees or branches or clear power lines, communication lines, facilities, or they're away from windows and skylights. Do you have emergency exits? Are they clearly marked? Are fire escapes unobstructed and you have access? Really important. Do the grounds comply with the ADA codes? Is an important question. Is it well lit? There's locks, alarms, your downspouts. Are they free of debris? Does the building comply with fire codes, electrical codes? Those buildings with chimneys, are they sealed? Another important, especially if you're in an older building, the building's floor loading capacity is known and all floors can safely support the load. You gotta be careful when you're in older buildings and you're piling in, objects or any other, you wanna make sure the floor can handle all that. And then it's shrubbery, flowers, and plants away from the bark of the building, and if parking is accessible. And then you can go into building interiors, such as, are the elevators working properly? And are they inspected? And then you can ask, about the environmental conditions. Are they monitored? Does the building have an HVAC system? Do you need to change the filter in the furnace system? How often do you change it? So a lot of information you can add onto your own worksheet too. Important is the first aid kit. Do your staff and volunteers know where it's at? Do they know where emergency contacts are? Do they have access to weather radios or weather alert systems? Because you're located in an area that's prone to changing weather daily or hourly, even. Do you have working fire detectors and extinguishers? Are the staff trained to use them? Again, in collections, some important questions you should know or have on your risk assessment worksheet is the shelving or other storage 4 to 6 inches off the floor? That's really important. You don't want any collections on the floor due to any chance of water flooding going on. Does the fire department have access to your collection storage? This is also should be part of your emergency preparedness plan. Contact the fire department or contact the police department. If you're on a university or campus, you should have campus police to come in and walk the ground so they have an understanding if there's an alarm that goes off or anything. They know the layout of your building. Backed up daily is your collection management system. Is it backed up daily? heavy items stored on lower shelves? Are there proper labeling and marking? Is the integrated pest management regularly updated and reviewed? Are staff and volunteers trained in proper handling of objects? Is there a collection management policy? Do you have a loan policy? Are your temperature and relative humidity, being monitored, and are the temperature and humidity requirements different materials in the collection understood? Because not every item in the collection is under the same temperature or humidity. Insurance is important. I can't stress this enough. If you have insurance policies, do the staff, are they aware of them? Can they access them in case of emergency? And are the records maintained in a safe and accessible environment? And you can keep going on, even with staff. You can have a location of, do you have a handbook? Do they have access to emergency contact numbers? Have they participated? Do you do an evacuation drill? Do they know general housekeeping too, which is important. So these are just a little bit that I pulled off of these sheets on creating your own worksheet, because like I said, some of you may not have need some of these as well. So you want to pull it, coordinates with your institution. Some of you may not have elevators, so that's what the worksheets will help with when you create your own. And then you would pick a day and time to have staff or a staff member, volunteer, board member, executive director, or someone from admin to come together, pick a day and time, and just spend some time walking through and going over this worksheet, answering these questions, and then sit down together and figure out the risk of these, and then make notes as what's your next plan. And that would be the risk management, is to plan to what the next step is to take care of it. And while you're going through your risk assessment and these questions, these are questions you kind of want to keep in mind as well. It's like, for example, you see a tree leaning towards your building, it's like, what can go wrong? What are the consequences? And how could it happen? So in that area, you can have a tornado, you can have straight line winds, anything. So something to keep in mind as you're doing your risk analysis. So these is just an example here to keep in mind with risk assessment. I'm just going to give examples. So the image on the left in the jar is actually a chunk of marble. So I'm not sure, every institution is different, but some may have marble flooring, or you might have marble countertops, and you do events. So if you do parties, if you do weddings, you're going to have all kinds of food and drinks at these events. And this chunk of marble is actually dissolving in a jar of champagne. Now, granted, you're not going to have an overwhelming amount of champagne like this in events, but over time, this is what happens with champagne to marble. So good point with risk assessments, making sure you have house cleaning procedures to go with your events. Some people are not going to probably like this, but live plants are a pest infestation. Plants in moist soil provide not only a food source, but a habitat for pests, and that can go onto your museum objects. They can carry pests from outside the museum environment, posing a risk to your collections. Watering them, you're increasing the localized humidity, which can degrade paper, textiles, and other vulnerable materials. The moist soil itself is a breeding ground for mold and bacteria, not to mention a habitat for pests. That can also damage the pollen itself, can stain. So if a bug lands on the pollen and it decides to go, oh, I see your textile, sitting over here, that can stain it. Not to mention just the pot itself can, if wherever you're placing the pot, it can damage the countertop as well. True story. I have a colleague of mine, when we worked in the museum, she had told me when she got out of graduate school in her first museum job, she discovered a moth in the collections. And so she brought it up to her supervisor, And your supervisor's like, yeah. So remember that meme I showed you earlier, we saw that risk and we chose to ignore it. So they ignored it. And long story short, it ended up costing over $30,000 worth of damage. So make sure you take proper care, and a risk assessment will help with that and identify these. So another problem is nitrate film. It's very dangerous, highly flammable, burns at a rate higher than gasoline. The fire can generate nitric acid fumes. So 35 millimeter film manufactured before 1951 is considered nitrate. So they can spontaneously combust. So that's why back in the day, movie theaters ended up having the projector room separate from the theater because film would cause fires. So in order to do that, they separate projector film. So you've got to be careful with film in general, 8 millimeter and 16 millimeter. I came across in one institution that I worked at that had a cardboard box of film that was stacked vertically. And I learned in my graduate studies of a syndrome called vinegar syndrome that can happen to film, 8 millimeter and 16 millimeter. And I just thought, oh, okay, and it's a vinegar smell you get when there's film deteriorating. So I opened this box, and it was the first time I experienced vinegar syndrome. And it's true, it smells exactly like vinegar. So I knew out of these 6 or 8 canisters that one of them was having an issue. So I separated them in each in their own box. And then there's these strips that you can get called AD strips. And I place it on each of the film. And they're a blue strip, and then they will change color if like the film is deteriorating from like a blue to green to yellow. And so I put these strips in and I found the one that was a problem child, but on the indicator strip, it was still okay, but it was a good thing I separated them. Another thing to keep in mind is any of your collections that might have liquid objects or art that can have liquid mercury or asbestos in the sculpture, or even works that can paper that contain blood. It's something that you want to also make note of when you're doing your risk assessment. So circling back, basically the risk assessment is you're identifying the potential hazards and risks to your objects or your building or even your staff. And I can't even forget your visitors as well. You want to analyze the risk and the impact it has. So that's either low, moderate, or severe, and then implementing a mitigation plan to control these risks or fix any of the issues that you see in your institution when you do your risk assessment. Because all in all, museums serve the public and fulfilling your missions, and they include collecting, preserving, interpreting, exhibiting, and documenting your collection that you hold in the public trust. So the risk assessment can help ensure a museum is taking necessary procedures to fulfill its obligations to the public. Nothing's worse than to have something happen to your collections and word gets out and reflect back on your institution, yourself, and your donors. So that's that. Any questions I hopefully can answer? Or has anybody had an issue before with any risk in their institution? And how did you solve it? One of the main things too, because we're coming up on that season of winter and freezing as well, that should be included on your worksheet is the staff and volunteers know where the water main shutoff is. So in case there's a pipe burst, it might be a localized or where all the valves are if there's more than one in your building. So that way, if a pipe bursts, then the staff or volunteer will know exactly where to go to shut off the water before anything gets damaged.
Yeah, this spring we had a pipe bib burst after the freeze, and we had a lot of water come in. It rained down in our basement, and luckily nothing was damaged. But we had an issue with our turning off our water main, because our water main needed a wrench to turn it off. We knew where it was, but the wrench was missing.
Oh no. Oh
Yeah,
no. That's a risk.
that's a risk, right? So now the wrench is zip tied to the water main.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, some of these situations happen first before you get to do a risk assessment or an emergency preparedness plan too. Sometimes that doesn't happen until after something does happen. But with the risk assessment, you at least can have an idea, and it's recommended to do these annually. But I think it just can also be based on your own institution yourself, especially if you find something that's a pretty big problem, then you want to keep tabs on it as well. Like the example like I gave about the film I discovered was I was monitoring it for 2 weeks before I decided, okay, we're good. The changing of the strip didn't happen anymore. Another good thing to go with when you're doing a risk assessment and you're putting together these questions for your worksheet and you go and do it is to take photos. That way, if you discover something like an object might be have some, looks like the film, for example, I used, like what I did was take photos when every time I went in to check on it, I would take photos of that 8E strip. So that way I can compare and see if the color was changing anymore. And that way I knew when it was stopped changing color. So photos is a very good thing. And plus also to present to the board as well, like anything that comes up that if a board member can't be involved with the risk assessment process, you can at least present it to the board as well and say, hey, we have a problem in this area, or there's a problem here. And then that way they're in the loop as well to know what's going on.
Questions for Liz? Well, Liz, there aren't any more questions. I want to thank you for putting together this presentation. If you're willing to share your slides and those links, I'll put them up on the NMA website.
Yeah.
And this video, of course, will be part of our YouTube library. And so if you have any colleagues or you think that there's anybody who would benefit from this, please share it. And I'm trying to pull up our next monthly musing is November 21st. Now that is a week earlier due to the holiday, and we're going to talk about museum administration, the revision of the book by Deb Arns. Again, that's a week early, so November 21st. And same with December, that'll be December 19th, a week early as well. And we'll talk about creating a successful breakout proposal with John Woodward from MPMA. And then our 2026 calendar is starting to fill up too. So if anybody has any ideas or would like to present something, we'd appreciate that. In January, we're going to have textile storage with Alyssa Smith, and then she's going to do another presentation in February about youth volunteership. If you had a chance to see her presentation at MPMA, I hear it was excellent. So she's going to repeat that for us. And then March and April are going to be all about the conference. The conference this year is in Beatrice. In April, maybe you can remind me of the dates.
Yes, it's April 13th, 14th, and 15th, right around there. It's that kickoff on the Sunday and then that Monday but 14th and 15th, I believe, are the 2 dates. It's either 13th and 14th or 14th and 15th, but it's that Sunday, Monday, Tuesday there. Yeah.
And I'm excited to announce that Jane Rips from the Jewish Heritage Center is going to talk to us in May. May is Jewish Heritage Month, so she's going to talk about establishing their museum and what they do and what they preserve. So that'll be exciting. And then in June, again, another MPMA treasure was Square Holes. So they'll be talking about helping neurodivergent people in your museums. But the rest of the calendar is open. So if you have any ideas or suggestions, please send them to me. And if you're not willing to present it, I can always find somebody who can. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming today. And we'll see you next month.
Nice seeing you. Bye.